Uh, the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy in Anna Karenina noted that all happy families are alike, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And in the same analogy, all peoples around the world, including in the United States and the Philippines, that are attracted to authoritarian tendencies, or rulers with authoritarian tendencies, are attracted to them in their own way. Here in the United States, you see the phenomenon of President Trump starting the trade war against allies and against China, and it's his way of connecting with Americans who are who resent that their local manufacturing industries have run away to other countries. So he's trying to impose taxes on imports from these countries. There's also the emergence with signals from the president, the emergence of a rage against immigrants and people of color in general. I think that's very noticeable today. Immigrants and peoples of color are being accused as interlopers, taking away jobs, or welfare and everything. Now, Western Europe, Germany, Italy, France, even Spain, also has its own response to its own way of wanting to lean towards authoritarian rule, and that's shown in the debate and controversy over refugees, the dilution of the white European culture by refugees. So you have these conservative parties, neo-Nazis, and in Italy, neo-fascists are rising again and gaining seats in their parliaments. Now, the Philippines, how are Filipinos, many of them, responding to globalization in their own way? Well, they voted in President Duterte. He won 16 million votes, popular votes, based on his record as a strong hand, ruling with a strong hand in Davao City. He cleaned up Davao City of crime, drugs, mainly through extrajudicial means, meaning death squads, improved the basic services. So you call 911 or you get a response, stuff like that. So that, and not only that, he didn't only win, but he actually enjoyed and is still enjoying even some fanatical support. So that if you criticize him on the internet, you get a backlash of vile, hate-filled threats from his supporters. This is part of the phenomenon. And despite the high level of corruption still existing, and the impunity with which his cabinet members and some of his officials have behaved, taking shortcuts, undermining the rule of law. They just removed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court through, I would say, underhanded means. That is the way Filipinos are responding to the discontent over the effects of globalization and the failure of liberal rulers or liberal presidents in the past to solve the basic problems of the Philippines. So Filipinos are very dissatisfied with the plodding nature of Philippine democracy and the hurly-burly of all these debates, and before you could get things done, you have to pay somebody off, stuff like that. And these are very, very justified resentments. But underneath that, there's still something particular in the Filipino political psyche, according to some observers, like Professor Randy David, a sociologist, that makes Filipino thinking, political thinking, kind of like makes it drawn to some authoritarian figures or images or tendencies. And he traces this to the history, the social history of the Philippines. So the fact that pre-Hispanic Philippines started out as smaller communities governed by datus and rajas and in a consultative body of elders, the ruler being the most powerful warrior, the most accomplished warrior of that community. So there was already a tendency to look up to strong authority, even though apparently by many accounts, such pre-Hispanic communities were rather benign in terms of the way that they're ruled. The difference started to come in when the Spanish colonialism arrived in the Philippines. To establish their rule, they co-opted that ruling elite, local ruling elite, and introduced a hierarchy of privilege that, aside from people looking at them because they're great warriors, they now looked at these people because they're also privileged. You know, some property, they could live under the bells, sobre los whatever, campanilla, you know, which is the choice spots on a public square near the church, closer to God. So, and then the other thing that was introduced was Christianity, which married with animism and ancestor worship and introduced a messianic religion, that the Savior will be coming, as an all-powerful Savior will be coming to solve our problems, whatever. So you get that. When the Americans came, they didn't necessarily rearrange things. They just, again, also preempted such an arrangement. But the Filipino leadership of the revolution also were accountable and culpable for continuing such a relationship, elite rule. Because what they did, before the Filipino-American War started, the Filipino leaders, led by Aguinaldo, wanted to present to the world a Filipino government led by educated people, led by cultured people, as opposed to the argument of the American imperialists that the Filipinos were not ready for independence and must be tutored. And to be tutored, they must be conquered. So, how did the revolutionary leadership do this image job? Well, let's start with the menu for the Malolos Congress, which was the founding Congress of the First Republic, which drafted the Constitution of the Republic. And their menu was written in French. So I don't know if, I don't speak French, if anybody can correct my pronunciation. Printed on the menu for the dinner is coquille de crab, probably tortang alimango, but in French. Yeah? Abatis de poulet a la Tagal, which is probably adobo. And the din truffé a la Manilwa, which is probably relleno. Okay? Now, the writer, Nick Joaquin, said, we can laugh at this, but this was their attempt to show to the world that the Filipinos were not hicks. You know, we studied in Europe. You know, we know what we're eating. You know, we know what's good to eat and stuff like that. Okay? More than that, according to Mila Guerrero, the historian, to present this wonderful image of a strong and educated Filipino elite ready for democracy, the revolutionary leadership also started recruiting local leaders to the revolutionary government who were not necessarily the revolutionary leaders of that locality. what they did was they, as a basis for recruiting leaders to the revolutionary leadership, was based on whether they were educated or own property. So somebody who might be a revolutionary leader in Nueva Ecija, little town, might not have a diploma. So, well, you know, too bad. This is all to represent a government that is, you know, admirable and educated and accomplished. And also, in addition to that, when they confiscated the friar lands, they started giving land to some of those who didn't have so much land. So what you have here, even before the end of the Filipino-American War, was already an elite that only mainly worked for itself. So that by the time when the Americans won in the Filipino-American War, established the first Philippine Assembly, you would find that the members of this assembly, most of them were also members of the Malolos Congress. Okay. Some of whom were even collaborators with the Spanish. Okay, so here you go, right from the very beginning. Sure, the United States consolidated, preempted the prevailing rule of the local elite, and even the revolution, leaders of the revolution also helped in consolidating that rule. So that from then on until independence, and beyond independence, the Philippines had always been ruled by an oligarchic elite. And as Professor David noted, so what we have is really an elite democracy with a surface, with a facade of American-style democracy that has yet to take root. So it's still a very feeble type of democracy. That's why people have been rightfully, justifiably resentful of the fact that nothing seems to happen under our system of democratic government. Why it was rather easy for Ferdinand Marcos to be able to monopolize power and impose a dictatorship. And now, today, why we have the phenomenon of President Duterte, whose main accomplishment so far is really the elimination of around 20,000 drug addicts. Physical elimination. Lately, the rounding up of the tambay, the loiterers, jobless loiterers, who use the streets as part of their living room, which is a natural way of life for the Filipinos in Manila. They have very small houses, and of course, but people still love him because he is so natural, right? He has no filters. He's authentic. You know, like Trump is authentic and natural, and so what? This is what we have right now. And then the question actually is, why, if the Filipinos had such a tendency in the political culture, why is it that only Marcos was the one that emerged in all that long history as a dictator? It's mainly because, ironically, because of the presence of the United States in the Philippines. The only other, before Marcos, the only other Filipino leader that had the mass appeal and the support of the people was Ramon Magsaysay, who defeated the Huk Rebellion, the Communist Rebellion. But he didn't have to resort to autocratic means. He didn't have to resort to authoritarian ways. But he was very popular. As a 10-year-old boy, I was among those who tore off his Batongbacal when he came to town, you know. It's because the United States wanted to present the Philippines as a showcase for American democracy. That's why any and all tendencies towards, you know, dictatorial rule or authoritarian rule was kept under control. The main reason that Marcos rose to such powers because the United States needed him. And he had the United States in the you-know-where because the United States was in the middle of a war in Vietnam and needed the Philippines as a very important staging area for bombing Vietnam and for transporting soldiers that are coming home or injured soldiers. So aside from Clark Air Base and Subic Naval Base, they opened up Mactan Air Base in Cebu. And so because of that, they had to support Marcos until he was overthrown by EDSA. And that's the only reason that why we hadn't, unlike Latin America, we didn't have a succession of dictators. But, you know, apparently, what we still need to do is to develop a population of people that are sufficiently educated so that it will become democratic-minded, that the political culture really becomes democratic. I mean, in the United States, of course, you can see President Trump making headway, but you can see the strength of democratic institutions in this country. It's not going to fall away right away, you know. We need a similar kind of strong democratic culture among our people. And for those of us in the United States, we also need the same thing, you know, and that's why it's important to support the democratic movements in the Philippines and any movement for democratic rights, not only among Filipinos, but with other communities in this country. Okay, thank you. To the local government, that because it's centralized in Manila, Manila has had this veto power over who's going to get what and how much. So in response to that was this proposal for charter change, which is to break up the Philippines into smaller states that are going to be federalized like in the United States. And that way, the revenues of the government can be redistributed. Okay, that's one. But as critics said, you don't need to change the Constitution to decentralize the government. You don't need federalism to decentralize the government. It's already in the 1987 Constitution that called for a more equal redistribution of the revenues from the central government. It just needs implementation, enacting laws and implementing them. You know, so what is this federalism proposal? Where is this really coming from? It's a desire by the local elites to entrench themselves in their fiefdoms, you know, by getting money from the central government and then using that in their own way. One of the dangers is that it's an easy way for a country like China to influence parts of the Philippines to go its way when it comes to its claims in the South China Sea territorial claims. Even though the national foreign policy must be directed by the national government, there are ways that you could undermine that by direct negotiation, let's say with Mindanao, you know, trade, whatever, you know. Now the problem with just mentioning that or loans. Okay. The New York Times reported just 3 weeks ago, Sri Lanka borrowed heavily from China, could not pay, and had to cede part of its territory in payment. A major port. Okay, so that's how it's going to be happening. Not only is Duterte not resisting encroachments, it's borrowing money from China. It's going to be borrowing $7 billion at 3% interest, whereas Japan is offering 0.2%. Yeah. And with a promise of another 200 billion, you know, at the same rate. So where is it going to, you know, that's how much, what are we going to give up? What's the Philippines going to give up in exchange for that? You know? So, anyway, what's the second question is?
question was in regards to the recount for.
Oh, the recount.
Yeah,
Okay, that's also in danger.
Yeah.
Because the Supreme Court is part of the decision maker in terms of whether certain counts are valid. As you remember, the judges who overthrew the Chief Justice are also the very same judges who are going to decide, parts of the recount, not the whole recount, but whether the recount is valid. So they have an in there, and then Duterte has already admitted that Amy Marcos had funded his election campaign. So Amy, yes, funded his election campaign. Okay, and the more recent moves, just to warn you, there's now a proposal by members of the supermajority in the House to cancel the 2019 midterm election, meaning they want to keep the supermajority, not to dilute it. And then the thing with the Constitution, the recharter, aside from federalism, the proposal is to make the president, the current president, be the transitory, trustee or president. Essentially, is extending the term of the president. So anyway.
So it is 2:45. I think you had a question. You could talk to Rene after. It's 2:45, so we want to end the discussion. And thank you all for coming. We'll be outside selling books if you'd like to buy some. We have a T-square if you'd like to recharge one. Thank you.
Better than